how I ever got chosen to talk about this other than I've had way too much experience in dealing with catastrophic injuries or deaths of student athletes. And so it comes from that perspective of dealing with that as an athletic trainer and then implementing the policies and the structure needed as an athletic director. And so we'll spend some time talking about this. Again, I guess I'm apologizing in advance because I know that these two topics today, for many of you, for some of you in this room, will stir up some difficult emotional responses. I mean, I understand how many deaths this conference has suffered over the last 2 years of former employees, of student athletes, whether it's accidental, whether it was suicidal. And so, again, my empathy and my sympathy and my apologies if this is uncomfortable. But one of the things that in my experiences as an athletic director, I found that we were just too ill-equipped. We didn't think proactively about how to deal with this. And then it happened. And then we had to respond. And so we'll be giving you some strategies today on how to think about this maybe a little bit differently. Before I start on that, I do understand, having lived my whole life pretty much in the Pacific Northwest and working at every level of intercollegiate athletics, I know the difficulty that there is in our community colleges or two-year institutions for athletic trainers. And I just would like to offer my services. I speak nationally on hiring athletic trainers through a medical model. And just to give you a real quick story of how this works, at Montana Western, I was the head athletic trainer 7 years ago. We had 2 athletic trainers. Each of us was 50% athletic trainer, 50% teacher. So that's really one full-time equivalent athletic trainer for 350 student athletes, which included intercollegiate football and intercollegiate rodeo. So do the math on that. We transitioned out of a medical model, and so the amount of money that the university was paying for those 2 athletic trainers was transitioned to a regional hospital. That regional hospital supplemented that salary. We now have 3 full-time athletic trainers. In the old model under athletics, they were making about $28,000 to $32,000. Wait a minute, I'm PhD with 35 years and was making $34,000. And in the medical model, we have 3 athletic trainers, full-time, no teaching, and they started at $48,000 with full benefits. So the medical model is a great model of integrating your healthcare community into your intercollegiate athletic training, and it gives you the legal protection because, again, your athletic trainer, who is supervised by a physician, is making autonomous medical decisions rather than decisions that may be made by non-healthcare professionals. So just offer that as feel free to contact me if you'd like to hear more about it. I'm actually doing a webinar on this for the National Athletic Trainers Association on Tuesday of next week. So where we're at with this, again, a little crowd participation. How many of you had to deal with a catastrophic injury or death in athletics? Show of hands. Yeah, so that's about 50% of you. Those that didn't put your hands up, you probably will. Statistically, it's going to probably get you at some point. For those of you that raised your hands, how many of you felt that you were well prepared to handle that situation? Holy cow, that's terrible. None of you? What? Think about that. Almost half of you have had to deal with this, and not one of you felt well prepared to do so. Since none of you felt well prepared, this next question kind of falls mute, but how or what prepared you for that? And the answer is often life. I'd experienced it through this, or I'd seen it through that, and I had no formal training, and I just did the best I can because I didn't know what else to do. So what's your job What's your responsibility? What's your role as the director of athletics when it comes to this? Because statistically, it's probably going to hit one of you. We know in this conference, and again, Marco had given me some indicators that I think we've had 7 deaths in this conference in the last 2 years. 2 of which were accidental, and if my numbers are correct, I think 4 or 5 of which were suicide. In a conference this small in this region of the country, that's statistically frightening when I heard that. So today I'm going to hopefully equip you a little bit better to how you can develop policies and resources and identify solutions to deal with this more effectively as an athletic director. And then the last question on this slide is, who cares for you? There are some amazing resources out there. Again, I apologize, I know I'm an athletic trainer and I have been an athletic director, so I know my audience. But the National Athletic Trainers Association has prepared a program called AT's Care. And if your campus is dealing with a catastrophic injury or death, then your athletic trainer, as soon as the information is public about this, they will be contacted by one of our AT Cares members. And there's a team of experts that then will help you to work through this process when it happens to you on your campus. It's an amazing tool and resource. There are also some of you that maybe are what they call JED campuses. Again, if you go to the NAIA.org and that Student Health Wellness Center, and in our mental health resources, there's a national organization that's called JED. And they will do a similar thing for campuses in helping you to develop proactive strategies to deal with these types of situations and then to provide acute management when it happens. Again, the death of Tyler Walensky at Washington State a year or so back, when that happened, I was the first phone call from their athletic training staff. And they indicated, Russ, this is what's going on and we need some direction. And so it's with some of these resources that I'll be providing for you today. Again, my objectives in this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the emotional model of response to loss, how people process, how we grieve, how we move through things. We'll talk specifically about your role as athletic directors, and then we're going to give you some guidance and some structure on developing a catastrophic incident plan. So I'm going to give you a scenario. You're the athletic director at a small rural college in southwestern Montana. 10 sports, 350 student athletes. It's summer training. You've got about 40 of your 90 football players that decided to stay in Dillon on your campus over the course of the summer and train together. They all got jobs, they're working, and they've got their training set up. You're a new athletic director. Athletic directors at many small colleges actually serve on the chancellor's cabinet or the president's cabinet because so many of our institutions, athletics are an important enrollment driver. And so this athletic director was on the chancellor's cabinet. And just 2 weeks prior to this scenario, the chancellor fired the communications director. So you're at an institution and you don't have a communications director. And you're in bed, it's midnight, and the phone rings. And it's your head football coach. And the coach says, Russ, MJ Simpkins is dead. He died in a house fire. His 2 roommates pulled him out and tried to resuscitate him. Local kid, All-American, 4.0. Mom works at the university. Brother plays on the team. No communications director. What do you do? What do you do? You can tell it's real. First call to your chancellor. Our chancellor called Beth here's what's going on. She says, come get me. So I went and picked her up. We went to the scene of the fire. The coach was there. 6 or 8 of the teammates were there. The 2 boys that tried to resuscitate the young man were there. Both had suffered smoke inhalation and were being cared for by our EMS. We go to the hospital, and they were working to try to resuscitate MJ. His parents were there, extended family, again, local kid, big family. Football coach, here comes the assistant coach, here comes the defensive coordinator, here comes the football team. 30, 40 kids later, they make the determination that nothing more can be done. It's now about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. We have 6 a.m. lifting the next day. So the football coach and I developed a strategy. So what are we going to do when the kids come? Because even with social media, they didn't all know. Some of them, or several of them, did know and didn't come. Those who did come, we just gathered them in the room and we told them, we talked to them, and we identified resources. Our next call was to activate our critical incident response team, which included our campus counselor. He was available immediately on site. Over the course of that day, the chancellor determined that since we didn't have a communications director, Russ, guess what? You're going to handle all communications on this as the athletic director. So I wrote the press release, had it reviewed, and it was sent out. I then proceeded to have 7 television interviews over the course of the next 12 hours of people covering the incident. Throughout the course of the day, I met with the family. That night, I met with the team, and then went over the next 5 days to plan the entire service for his burial. And I was well prepared. It wasn't easier. So as we look at these critical incidents, an injury or illness of extreme nature is how we define what a catastrophic incident is. It's devastating, the impact that it has not only on the individual, but on all of those that surround that individual. When we think about the process that we go through in dealing with catastrophic injury, which many times leads to the death of a student athlete, we try to think of it from a structure perspective. We try to give it some structure, and when we can give it an organized structure, it helps. But recognize and realize that in chaos, even the best laid plans don't feel very structured. Most people will go through, and you're probably familiar with this, as many of us came out of the kinesiology, health, fitness, and phys ed, Dr. Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of death and dying. The interesting thing is that not only are they the 5 stages of dealing with death and dying, but as an athletic trainer, when I see a catastrophic or a very serious injury, I can watch the student athlete go through those 5 processes as well. It's pretty interesting to see. Again, the denial, no, it didn't happen, he's really not dead, this is a dream, this isn't real. The anger, again, the punching the wall, the crashing the car, all of these things that you see, the bargaining, oh, Lord, if you just give him one more chance, the depression, and then moving to the acceptance. Interestingly enough, most people will progress through these 5 stages, and they generally will progress through them in that order. But sometimes it doesn't go in that order. Sometimes it's kittywampus and goes all different other directions. But generally speaking, and so why is this important, Russ? When you recognize where they're at, so for example, when I'm taking an athlete off the field and they're acutely injured and it's a severe traumatic injury, and I get in their face and they throw the helmet and fracture the ankle at the person next to them, I probably should have recognized they were in anger. And I probably should have backed off and stayed back a little bit in recognition of their emotional state at that point. That was true, by the way. I saw that happen with a student athlete where his helmet fractured the ankle of another player. So I'll talk a little bit about the role of the athletic trainer, but I'll also talk about the role of the athletic director more extensively here at the end. So my job as the athletic trainer is to take control. In catastrophe, there's chaos. And what the patient and what the people around the patient are looking for is somebody to take control. And in doing that, I've got to be firm, I got to be confident, I got to have my game plan, I got to be prepared, I got to be understanding, not sensitive. In athletic training, we're doing what's called a medical timeout before every game. The athletic trainers meet with the athletic trainer from the other team. We meet with the ambulance personnel. We talk with the team physicians. And we say, in the event of a serious incident, here's what's going to happen. That's our medical timeout. So guess what? When it happens, we already have gone through it. We know who does what. We've got everything laid out and planned. That's the role of your athletic trainer. They're good. Athletic trainers, generally speaking, are well prepared to handle these emergency or catastrophic situations. We get better with age because we get experience with age. But that's what your AT's role is. The athletic trainers are also the facilitator of the grief response. They will recognize generally what the kid or what the patient or what the client is going through, what the coach. They'll recognize what they're going through. And a lot of these are things that we all go through as we deal with these types of catastrophic incidents. Anxiety, blame off. If we hadn't done that drill, that the kid tackled wrong and lowered his head and broke his neck and now he's paralyzed, hopelessness and uncertainty and all of these emotional feelings, this loss of control. And loss of control ties back to the previous slide, take control. So if you don't have an athletic trainer and you're the athletic trainer and in the game management on the scene and this happens, that's going to become your role in the absence of the athletic trainer. There's a loss of control and it's got to be up to somebody to take control. Again, anger, social isolation. The social isolation we often see later on where people remove themselves from public activities. They often are disorganized, and again, guilt, which is often overwhelming. Grief response is not a static state. It's active and it's emotional and it's all over. It's up and down and in and out. And I've seen instances with concussed patients where at 1 minute they, as the concussed patient, are the funniest person I've ever seen in my life. They're cracking one-liners. You'd think they belong on a nighttime talk show. It's absolutely hilarious. And 5 minutes later, they're in tears. I'm never going to be able to play again. This is, oh, woe is me, and Eeyore, and on and on and on. Those are the kinds of things that you see with most injuries, with concussive injuries even more so, but very frequently with catastrophic injuries, is this disorganized, kind of chaotic response to life. It's often unpredictable. I gave you Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of death and dying. It would be nice if it was that predictable. I can generally see that in most every situation, but it's not always that organized. So your role in these situations, anybody want to give me a little crowd participation? What's your role as the athletic director in these situations? Let's go to somebody who's got an athletic trainer. Give me your role as the athletic director when you have a situation like this happens. Can I get some?
Your trainer.
Beg your pardon?
Firstly, support and empower your trainer to have full right to act.
Okay. So I'm gonna pick on you a little bit. Sorry, I'm moving away from this here. So, mom comes out of the stand and is frantic. And your athletic trainer is trying to manage this unconscious patient. You're the athletic director. What's your role?
To make sure that athletic trainer can act in their full capacity and comfort mom so that task can be taken care of.
The nurse comes out of the stands. I'm a nurse. I know what's going on. It doesn't matter, you worked in a geriatric hospital and you never seen an acute care patient for the last 20 freaking years. But I'm a nurse, I know what's going on. Good intending people. Well, I mean, they want to take care of and manage the best they can based on their training. But again, when you look at the role and the responsibility, the athletic director is absolutely the critical key to facilitating your athletic trainer's effectiveness. Absolutely. At that role, I can't state any more powerfully what your role is in protecting that athletic trainer so they can do their job. And if you don't have an athletic trainer, it's a whole different dialogue, isn't it? It's a whole lot more difficult. My encouragement is if you're proactive in your planning, you'll be better equipped to manage these catastrophic incidents. How many of you have department emergency action plans? Okay, so again, I'll just say in today's day and age of litigations, if you don't, you are negligent. Can I say that any more clearly? If you don't, you are negligent. Emergency action plans, venue specific. What do you do in your gym that's different than in your pool, that's different in your wrestling room, that's different on your soccer field? Emergency action plans must be venue specific. And all they do, it's a simple document. If you want to know how to do it, go to NAIA.org, click on athletic trainers, go to emergency action plan. I've got a template that you can download, that you can fill in, copy and paste, put your maps and put your person's name, and you can post it at every one of your venues, whether you have an athletic trainer or not. Because the reality is that even if you have an athletic trainer, they can't be everywhere. So your coaches need to know what your emergency action plan is. Your emergency action plans identifies what you do in a catastrophic incident. It develops the immediate action plan. Now, we're not worried about the long term. We're worried about the immediate, the absolute, what do I need to do right now? And then it predetermines the team's makeup. Again, if we look at the incident, the McNair incident where the football player died as a result of heat illness, I think it was at Maryland this last year, they had an emergency action plan. That emergency action plan called for cold immersion tubs. Guess what happened? They didn't follow their emergency action plan. Kid died. Heat illness is 100% preventable. Did you hear that? Heat illness is 100% preventable. There should be no deaths from heat illness while participating in intercollegiate athletics. The treatment is easy. Buy a $10 little kiddie's swimming pool and fill it with cold water. It's that simple when the recognition and the on-site care. And it's part of the emergency action plan. And when you've got these plans, you've got to follow them. If you don't follow your emergency action plan, you saw the president of Maryland say, "We are guilty. We were negligent." He said that publicly. Yeah, by the way, don't ever do that. Yeah, I'll talk in a minute here about that. But your emergency action plan predetermines your team makeup, who's a part of it and what they're doing. It delineates your chain of command, who's in charge, who's on first, what's on second, where's the splint kit, where's your AED, how often is that checked, everything's all a part of this. The emergency action plan is really helpful for coaches when you're at an away event, because you're in a venue that you've maybe played at before, but you've never really had to deal with an emergency. And so, again, if you're the host of an event, again, that medical timeout, it's kind of a corny way we talk about it, but it starts at the beginning of every game, that quickly, in less than a minute, reviews the emergency action plan for that venue. And in that case, it would be with the head coach in the event that there wasn't an athletic trainer there. Again, it also delineates who prepares the documentation, what documentation is required, and what is a flow chart for guideline implementation. And again, this will be available, this PowerPoint, on your website and the video, so if you're taking notes on it, you'll have access to all of this as we move on. So who should be involved in this critical incident response team? Again, I think it's got to be led by the athletic director in relationship with athletic director to empower them and to facilitate this discussion. How many of you on your campuses have a SAC or an ASA? This is in the NCAA, they're called Student Athlete Advisory Committees. In the NAIA, we call them Associations of Student Athletes. How many of your campuses have these? I found, I saw probably 8 or 10 hands go up. I found that in my job as an athletic director, it became a lot easier when I organized and formed a Student Athlete Advisory Committee. These kids want to be involved in what's going on, and they can give you some amazing insight, and they feel very empowered, and they did some amazing things at our university that I never would have expected that they would have been able to do. We have, at my university, we had our Student Athlete Advisory Committee, one rep from that group on this team. We also ran everything through legal. We were a public state university, so we also involve ministry, which is appropriate to do even if you're state run. Many of our kids will come from faith perspectives, and so having that somebody on your critical incident response team who can deal with things from a spiritual and emotional perspective will be helpful. Obviously your facility services, because you got to know, how do we get the ambulance in? Where can the ambulance drive? Can they go on the track? How do we get them? Do we have a cart? All of those kinds of things that your facility services can help with. Student life. In our campus, student life was, your student government, your dean of students, those folks. We call them different things on different campuses, but that's, we have the director of student life on our critical incident response team. Communications, again, the guy we fired, that person should be there because they will become the key component that will advise the entire critical incident response team on how to appropriately respond. And then obviously counseling. I probably should list the counseling center as the number one next to the AD and the athletic trainer. They're not in order of importance. All of these are appropriate players on your critical incident response team. So what is a catastrophic incident or injury? Your critical incident response team will define it. So what we see most commonly is the death of a student athlete. We see it as the death of a coach. It could be the death of a beloved staff member. It could also be something that's a disabling or life-altering, that's permanent and often irreversible type of illness or injury. Those are how we would define or how we might articulate what a critical incident is on our campus. Communication. I just can't state the critical importance of communication. Clear, consistent is absolutely critical. Bullet 2, no other person, coach, teammate, athletic trainer, anybody, should publicly speak about the incident other than the person that is assigned to speak about the incident. Everybody with me on that? Now that feels a little bit sleazy, I'll tell you. I called the team in after MJ's death, and we had the team there, and we said, fellas, this is going to sound weird and feel uncomfortable. You can talk amongst each other, but you cannot talk about this, what happened to anybody outside of our community. Okay? Really important. And again, this is me putting on my lawyer's hat. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm preparing a lot of depositions here lately. There has to be one spokesperson. There has to be one person who handles all of this for protection of the family, and then secondarily for protection of the institution. It's so important that no exceptions to this can happen. If you don't have a critical incident response team, you're not going to be able to communicate this. Everybody with me on this? So if you do nothing else, you have this group together, and then an incident happens and you say, communication, here's how we're going to handle it, and there can be no exceptions. Again, the chancellor in my story, in the scenario I gave you, assigned that as my responsibility, and I was the only one that was able to publicly speak about the incident outside of our community, outside of that team. Obviously, we encourage dialogue amongst the team, amongst the coaches, within the department, but the minute it went outside, it was a completely different discussion. No exceptions. Important things to think about as you develop your critical incident response team. Who goes to the hospital? So let's say you have a soccer player and they have a collision and they have a loss of consciousness. They're lying unconscious on the field. Your athletic trainer's there. They take care of them. They stabilize them. We activate the EMS. They come out. They load them on the ambulance. Does your athletic trainer go with the kid? Or does your athletic trainer stay at the venue? You're on the road, by the way, and the kid's parents aren't there. Does the assistant coach go with the kid? Who goes? I don't have a right answer on that. If your athletic trainer leaves and the game continues, then are you compliant with your emergency action plan that says you're going to have an athletic trainer on site when you're hosting an event like that? Probably in a questionable area. So predetermine it, and I don't have a right answer. I often, depending on staff sizes and locations, will often send an assistant coach because we need that point of contact with the patient at the hospital, especially if the kid's unconscious. You don't know the name, you don't know where they're from, you don't have their emergency contact information, but you probably don't know where their cell phone is, right? So somebody's got to be with them representing the institution. Go ahead.
If a family member is there, should you still send a rep from the institution, coach?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it was, if there is a family member there, is it okay just to assign that to the family member, let them do it, and hope that they report back to you? And my response is, if you can send an institutional representative, and it might be the AD or the assistant AD, or I can't think of sending our sports information directors, but those folks are amazing. They can do everything, and they do everything. I would prefer that somebody from the institution went with the family as well, because the family may be making critical decisions about the health and safety of that kid, and they're not communicating that effectively back to you as the institution. So it may not always be feasible. It's better family member than nobody, but I would prefer that you had a institutional representative. It might be your administrative assistant from the athletics department who's at the game. You know, anybody who can keep the communications going between you and the patient of what's going on. Again, who notifies the team when there's the catastrophic injury? In the case of the scenario of the death, you know, that was our head football coach made the decision that was his responsibility to notify the team as to what had happened, and then we advised him on what he was allowed to share with the team or not. Who activates the critical incident response team? Well, whoever's first on scene. If it's the athletic trainer and it's through you as the athletic director, however and whoever is involved in that, that's whose job it is. And again, everybody needs to know what that process is and how to activate it. And again, I apologize about this, but it feels like sometimes we can't do what's best for our student athletes because of the legal environment that we live in today. I hope that made everybody in here feel uncomfortable. It's what gives me all these damn gray hairs, excuse my French. It drives me nuts. My job is student athlete health and safety for an entire association of 65,000 student athletes. And I have to think about things from a legal defense perspective. And you wouldn't think those two would ever be at odds with each other. But I just hate to say they really are, and they really can be. So you've got to, as the athletic director. And I think if you've got a good relationship with your athletic trainer, I've heard people say the athletic trainer is the legal conscience of the department. They will tell you what's going on with that coach or with that team or with that level of training. There were 6 women's soccer players last week at Pitt, I think it was, all suffered from rhabdomyolysis. 9 student athletes, same soccer team. Rhabdo affects your kidney, and it probably results in permanent irreversible, and it is the direct result of overtraining. Who was supervising? How did the athletic director find out about it? Mom called from the hospital. because coach hadn't communicated to the athletic director. The athletic trainer wasn't on site because it was an off-season conditioning. And 9 kids were hospitalized. Last week. This is real, and it's life-threatening potential medical condition. You've got to think about the legal ramifications. Spiritual support, again, many of our student athletes, I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, but research shows the number one thing that college students want out of their college experience but aren't getting it today is spirituality. By the way, it's no different between publics and privates. That is the number one finding. I was amazed when I heard that statistic. We are in a society where kids want spirituality. And I'm separation of church and state. I'm not preaching here. Just recognize that this is where your kids are coming from. Your student athletes, this may be an important component of who they are. So what do you provide? Counseling services, financial issues, and the list goes on and on and on. So we talked about this in the first presentation. One of the things that hopefully you will have fewer critical incident responses is if we create a culture in which it's okay to talk about mental health conditions, because it might lead to fewer suicides. Seriously injured athletes, and this I found so interesting, they experience psychological shock, confusion, and disorientation when dealing with catastrophic incident. They appear disorganized. They display emotional and behavioral dysfunction. Duh, right? That makes sense. But in a crisis situation, the athlete is overwhelmed by their experience, causing them to not be able to identify resources. Who do I talk to? Where do I go? How do I get help? They're so overwhelmed they can't think about this because their athletics are that important to them. Research through this profile of mood states says that athletes suffer mental illnesses at a rate higher than the general student population does. And that an athlete, when they are injured, because of their investment in their sport, they will suffer more severe psychological issues. Which is interesting from my perspective that athletes deal with things differently because of what motivates them and how they, or why, or what's led to them being successful as a student athlete. Links to suicidal tendencies. Again, suicide is the second leading cause of death, 15 to 24-year-olds, our population. Fifth leading cause of death, 25 to 64-year-olds. Look at the age difference. What's that, 9 years versus 40 years? Dramatic. This is one that I want everybody to recognize, because it's probably the one that's the most uncomfortable for us as athletic administrators or as coaches or as athletic trainers to recognize. Despite what most people say, people with suicidal thoughts don't often offer those freely. I think I read statistically where, and I won't throw the number out, it was a very small number of successful suicides actually leave a note. Very, very few. Okay? However, this is the caveat. When you, as a caring person in an authority role, ask them how they're doing. What's going on? You're not counseling. You haven't put them on the couch and given them the box of Kleenex, as Victoria Garrett talked about. You're asking them how they're doing. And how they respond to you may absolutely astonish you. They frequently will say, you know, coach, I'm not doing well. I've never felt like this before. I am so lonely. I hate basketball. Now what do I do? Right? You've asked. They've responded. So where do we go from there? This is really important. Asking a kid how they're doing you may be the only one that shows them in their mind and in their world that you really care about who they are. So never be afraid to ask them. You haven't crossed any boundaries. It doesn't make you a counselor or put you in that counseling situation as long as you know what to do next. Your athletic trainer has the ability to prevent or minimize more severe reactions in catastrophic situations. Again, I've seen this. Bad fractures, dislocations on the field, and the other players come over to check it out and see what's going on, and next thing you know, you got a line of kids puking. Again, ADs, you step into this and help everybody out. Assistant coaches, have this all figured out. But your athletic trainer, on how they take control, and they're firm, and they're confident, and they direct everything that's happening, will minimize the severity of the environment. For your conference, you've got a great resource. I'm not sure how many of you know Anna. I think she spoke to this group a couple years back. Where's my Walla Walla Community College folks? Are you here today? They're snowed in Walla Walla, I guess. Anna is the athletic trainer at Walla Walla Community College. That's her number and that's her email, and she told me to share it with y'all. She will help you to think about implementing or developing emergency action plans. She will also help you to think about putting together your mental health resources and the development of a catastrophic injury or incident response team. This is what she does in her role as the athletic trainer there. She's done it for her campus, from what I understand, and I'm not sure the relationship to the conference, but my understanding is this is what she does for the conference as well. So she's a great resource. She'll work with your athletic trainer. In the absence of your athletic trainer, she'll probably be able to find somebody that will help you. Now, the only caveat to that, I think she's due in about 3 weeks. So if you get a little delay in response, I think she's scheduled to deliver here in the next, 4 to 6 weeks, if I'm not sure. So the relationship between you and your athletic trainer is critical to the appropriate management. Proactive strategies minimize confusion and chaos. That's all I got for you. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your attention.